Circular sock machines are a lot of fun. Mine is an antique auto knitter, and this is how it's supposed to run. But until today, it had been sitting unattended for several years, and it wasn't running like this. So we are recording the process of getting it back to work so as to possibly help anybody else who's trying to restore an old sock machine. This is how it was running when I started working on it. Basically, it was knitting, but it was very stiff occasionally. The gears didn't mesh and slipped, and there were quite a few flaws in the knitting. Here's what took place between the rough knitting you just saw and the smooth knitting at the very beginning of the movie. Also, as we go along and as things occur to me, I'll cover some basic points about sock machines in general. Any needles that are rusty or deformed have to be replaced. This is a brand new one, and that's how they should look. Sometimes if it's just a little bit of rust, you can use steel wool to get it off. And sometimes if this latch is stiff, and that's really the only problem, you can oil it. So right now I'm knitting very slowly, watching for needles that behave sluggishly and don't fully open and close in a timely way, and trying to see if a little oil will help. Today I'm using Ballistol. A lot of my fellow sock knitters prefer a product like this, any lightweight stainless sewing machine oil, especially ones with a zoom spout, because you see what it can do. This extendable, flexible spout makes it possible to place the oil wherever you truly need it on the machine. Early in the restoration process, this can include the needle channels themselves. Everywhere that metal touches metal, for example, there's a ring below the carriage itself that's going around the cylinder. That's a big place. And where the crank moves on its shaft. It's not as hard as you would think to tell where the oil is needed, because you've got your hands right on the machine and your ears close, and you can develop a sense for where the binding is. Sometimes even the adjusting screws have to be oiled so that you can even unscrew them enough to adjust. These two control the position of the carriage. And let's talk about them for a minute, because it's very common to need to adjust them. The yarn is being fed through two holes here, and it needs to emerge from this one at exactly the right height and distance towards the cylinder to be picked up by the needle hook as it passes. So this screw and slot will adjust the closeness. It needs to be really in close, but not close enough to break latches. And the same thing occurs here to adjust height. You can tell by eye whether or not the yarn is falling into the needle in the right place and go from there. This dial rotates up and down on a threaded post, adjusting stitch size. Smaller numbers are smaller stitches on mine. Mine is in rather rough shape, I'm afraid, but it does work effectively. I don't have any problems with any of the kinds of oil that other people use. They all seem to work quite well. But this is what I actually used to restore my machine at Jack's advice. Originally, when I bought this many years ago, it was entirely encrusted with black and not working. I know that some of them are black painted. That's not why mine was black. It was covered with old crud, as you have seen us discover happening in some other kinds of machines. That one still needs help. I can always use Croil too, which is more penetrating, also stinkier. Also, the resulting knitting from me having oiled this stuff will be useful only for rags. I might be able to wash it well enough to make it into a toy or something, but I'm going to live with that in service of doing the rest. And it may be that I have to change some needles. New ones still are available, but I like to make those that are working last as long as possible. The original restoration was done with Marvel Mystery Oil. These are cast metal. Even when new, the metal is naturally porous, and over time, of course, that porosity collects crud. Jack's automotive experience made him suggest Marvel Mystery Oil because he had had excellent results with that correcting this sort of problem. So lots of people restore them by spraying or dripping from the can oil in this area, knitting, 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 and repeating. And then, of course, you have to put rags or newspaper underneath you because you're definitely going to drip out black, nasty oil. But it's extremely effective. It was for me. At first, it would barely turn. And after a while, it got easier and easier and shinier and shinier. And I got better at using it. And so I wasn't really noticing how much it had progressed till I went to a sock knitting convention. And I accidentally drew a crowd. I didn't know that my knit machine was the quietest in the whole room, but it was. And it was the Marvel Mystery Oil treatment. You've seen us use a Marvel Mystery Oil bath for dirty, flatbed, more modern machines, at least for some features of them. There are machines you cannot do that way. But while restoring, I used Marvel Mystery Oil as the main lubricant and cleaner for this machine, and it got from very, very nasty to very, very nicely working and clean, and I rarely need to oil it now. I wore out the original oiler that I used, and I can't find another just like it, so I'll be buying one of these on Amazon to use going forward. That nice long spout delivers the oil where you need and want it, and that's what I used the whole time getting this machine back into service. I'm using an O-ring that we found the right size. It's made of some material called Buna N. It's the traditional thing to have in this position is a spring, literally a retaining spring. I like the O-ring really well, and when we introduced them and used to sell them, which we do not now, I can't get them anymore, some people just adored them, and other people thought I was a traitor to history and altogether a bad person. So you make up your own mind. But if you can find an O-ring that is the correct size, I will tell you that you may want to try it. I've had very good success with it. There are some other things that need doing here. I'm living with it at the moment, but this tension spring is supposed to behave like the tension spring of most knitting machines, only it's a simpler form. And it's rusted and it's lost its springiness. So that's one of the things on our list to do. This is the weight assembly. You can use 1, 2, or 3 of the discs. The whole assembly weighs 3 pounds, 11 ounces. So each weight is over a pound. This buckle is the method by which the weights are hung on the fabric. This end holds the weight. This end is continuing down from where it's being knitted. The buckle is designed so that you shouldn't have to reinforce it as I have done. It's not supposed to slip, but I have had it slip and drop the weights, which is totally undesirable. They could even break themselves, and they could certainly break your toe. So I normally use something to make sure that if the buckle decided it wanted to slip, it just couldn't do so. I double over the fabric and use something as a big pin. In upcoming videos, we'll actually knit some socks, design some socks, perfect the fabric for our own purposes, and perhaps get Jack to show us how to make a new tension spring and perfect a worn-out ribber.